It's Rory and Jessica from different parts of the world talking about something that nothing will ever change without this one thing. It's 4 letters. Do you know what it is, Rory?
I'm going to say love.
Oh, you hippie. It gives me an H, give me an O, give me a P, give me an E. And when we talked 2 days ago about hope.
Absolutely. It's about hope. But hope and love are,
Together.
in a lot of ways, they're very closely intertwined.
That's beautiful. I didn't think about that. Tell me a little bit about your theory and why you think so.
Years ago, I trained to be a Catholic priest. And in the journey, I looked at it from a point of view of saying, faith, hope, and love. And I got the faith piece. I got the love piece. And over all my years, from when I left school, kind of many years ago, I've always looked at what's that. I understand faith, I understand love, but what's this thing called hope? And so for the last many years, I've actually deep dived into what is hope? How does it show up? Because very quickly and very often we'll talk around, I hope you have a good day. Or, I hope you're well. But it's like when a person answering, I'm fine.
Yeah.
They're giving you a lot of information, but my sense is that it's an overused and under-recognized word for the power that it actually can unlock.
Beautiful. Because if it's connected to love, you're putting so much into that. Well, they say love is the answer. Love is the only thing that connects and changes and will change anything. And love won't ever come to being if you don't have the hope that it's there, that it exists, that you do something for it, that you believe in it, right? They're both very.
And we want our workplaces to be kind of more engaging, more inviting, and more accommodating for people to contribute. That we spend so much time at work, and over the years, especially my passion point is not doing one-on-one therapy as a psychologist. My passion point has always been, how can I work with teams at work? How can I work with making workplaces? Not when I grew up in the early days of my career, I was working in a unionized factory environment. And it was very much a union versus management kind of antagonistic, confrontational. They worked really slow and we demanded that they work really hard and fast. And the disconnect between these two groups of people fascinated me. And those were, going back, those were the days when HIV/AIDS was still becoming identified, a bit like where we were with COVID just a few years ago. So we had an incredible opportunity just to start learning practically in the ground, in a factory environment, in this confrontation. And I remember once dealing with and I had a rock solid case.
Yeah.
I could have this guy fired because he broke every rule in the book. He was absent too often. He was a poor performer. He was, over the time that I was there, he started wasting. He wasn't strong enough to do the job that he was employed to do. And he wasn't there often enough to do the job that we were paying him to do. So it was one of those, you got to a point where you realized, actually, all of us would be better off if he leaves. So from a management point of view, we were going to push him. And from the union point of view, when they went through the final investigation and so on, they literally said, and this is one of my big wake-up calls in my career, they said, this man has a family. He has young children. If he leaves here, you are actually having an impact into that family and the next generation. And I've walked away from that. Basically, we had every good reason to fire and to dismiss. And I spoke with our medical team on site, and we realized that we were right, but that wasn't enough. It wasn't all. And when I started understanding a little bit more around who this man was and how he worked and why he was wasting and why he wasn't performing what he is, we suddenly started finding, and from there, we found a way to make it work. We had to put certain terms and conditions, but we ended up, that very factory, that very medical center was recognized as one of the best medical centers in the country, and it was a pioneer of HIV/AIDS.
So
one of the shop stewards went on to become a global speaker in HIV/AIDS based on that kind of story, because it was happening, but none of us knew what we were all discovering as as it unfolded. And it's a bit like what happened to us in COVID. Should we have the vaccine? What do we do? Are we living at home? Are we working from home? Are we, how do we manage this thing? And sometimes there aren't any textbooks. And what I look at it is to say, what got me through that was a sense of a greater responsibility. If I put myself into his shoes, what would his wife, what would his children think? And that's where I started seeing work from a different perspective. And it was around, you can be doing work 100% right, but you also want to be doing work right. And right work is not just about doing the right things. It's about doing the right things rightly. And it's a stretch, because what you're starting to then look and to realize is that you are engaging people because they are people. And those people have other people that they are responsible for. So when you in an employer relationship, you actually have, in South Africa, you have 8 people dependent on that one job. So when you are dealing with this one person who's not stepping up and showing up, you've got 8 other people that are sitting behind that person.
But sorry, because I'm a German entrepreneur and I don't have as much love in my system, and I'm just trying to think like them. There's also 8 other guys who want that job, who have 8 other people relying on them. So if you're telling a company to employ someone who's not pulling their weight, how are you going to convince that guy to not just replace him with another guy who needs it equally as well, because this guy has HIV and will have medical costs in the future? Like, that company did remarkable work, and I'd say that's 1 in a million. Or do you see lots of examples of companies working with love that way?
So let me give you a different story. And I mean, you're right. So what we had in that unionized environment is we had should we call it, family members that were allowed to be on what we call temporary worker. So when we had a person that was off sick and we needed an emergency hands and legs to come in and fill, and so we had this labor pool, but they were directly correlated to, they were that group of those family members that were not full-time employees, but that was the agreement that we had with our union. And one of those guys came through, and I remember he was working, and the foreman came past and said, "This guy's working really well." And so on that recommendation, I had a vacancy in our apprentice training program, and we selected him into the apprentice training program. Long story short, we double trade tested that gentleman, the fastest ever in the history of our factory.
Cool.
With the highest results in the country. And when he started, he was illiterate. He actually could not, but he double trade tested.
I don't know.
And he went on to literally, so he was double qualified as a mechanical and electrician.
Okay, yeah.
And he could work on the line. So he wasn't just an operator.
Yeah.
In a matter of 2.5 years, he actually became what we called a millwright. So he was able to do electrical and mechanical work as well as operations. And from him, we then created a new trade test in South Africa called Process Artisan. So we had an artisan who was no longer just doing engineering stuff. He was also starting to do operational stuff.
Cool.
So we changed the way that manufacturing operated in the country.
Wow. Hey, the other day, this story was so cool. I wanted to touch on the stories that you told me about helping that guy with the skills program, who you helped that failed twice. We'll fast track that story and get to the good part about what you were doing with the government in that program and the groups that you found, and then also about DEI and how you put people in the positions that they might not be totally qualified for. So skills in DEI, that I would love to hear again.
So when I inherited that role as the apprentice training manager, I had people in the system already. And this one gentleman was getting ready to do his trade test. And my role was to ensure that they were successful as quickly as possible and get them out the system as qualified so they could then work in the factory. So he went to the trade test through the correct protocols, and he failed. So we try to look at it in terms of, well, what more can we do? So we re-prepared him and we checked a whole lot of information. We made sure that when he went for a second attempt, he would be successful, and he failed.
Yeah.
Now we only have 3 attempts. So now I'm running out of options here. I've kind of exhausted all the scaffolding that I can put in to assist this gentleman. And again, go back to my medical center. We found out that he was actually colorblind.
Yeah.
Now, it was never a criterion for selection. So suddenly what we found out is through a hard lot of lessons, we could actually fast track people into that sort of program going forward at very low cost. And don't waste 4 years of his time learning and doing and exploring and going through theory and practical and in the factory. But actually, he wasn't capable and suitable in that. We could have probably trade tested him in a different field, but not electrical. Remember electrical, the classic one of the bomb, he has to actually get the right wire and cut the right wire. Yeah. So we learned that. And then I applied that skill when I was running my own business, and we were doing unemployed people to a job creation program. So the government had this idea that we needed to really ramp up our skills development, particularly for youth. So we had a whole lot of people that had paid to do post-school qualifications, but they weren't employable because there was this skills gap of being able to do the job that the employer wanted them to be employed for. So it doesn't matter if you have a qualification, you don't have the experience. And what we found, for example, in a different trade with hairdressing, is the same issue applies. We had learners that had been doing hairdressing for years, and they get to their final trade test, and suddenly they have to produce a medical certificate which says that they don't have a particular skin condition.
Yeah.
Now, what we then did is we reverse engineered that, and we've made that one of the criteria. If you want to be and registered to do a 4-year hairdressing qualification, then up front, we need to do that medical assessment at very low cost, and then actually say to this person, you might have the art and the passion and the desire, but actually your skin isn't going to help you because you can't, the chemicals later will actually be a work hazard for you. So rather than waiting and doing that kind of test and check only at the end, there's no textbook in the world that will tell you that stuff.
It's interesting that the kind of things. I talked to Jay yesterday from AQai, and that's how you and I know each other, from adaptability assessments. And this idea about, I don't even know what, I want to kind of link like the privilege part of that. So it's like, I did my qualifications. I know that I have this, that, I'm perfect for the job and I get the job. But these people that you're talking about didn't have the opportunities to know if they have eczema. They didn't know that they were colorblind because they didn't go to the schools that would have tested that or had the ability to know those kind of things. And then they lose their opportunities because they fail. And then they end up not working in what they're skilled in. And so it's like these initiatives that you're doing is leveling the playing field by thinking of, I don't know how to say it, like thinking of the things that they didn't get a chance to know before and putting them into an equal playing ground. And I find it so beautiful. There's small little things that you guys thought of that, and I think it's like, we have to think of these small things that people of privilege, like I know I'm not colorblind because I went to a private school. They would have found that out. But if I didn't, I would have just missed the opportunities, So it's.
So Jessica, let me give you a different scenario that's very close to home. My son, we identified him at the end of his primary school, getting ready to go to high school. We identified that he had what we now can call a processing issue. So remember when you go and do a test and they give you like this picture of a mosaic. So it's lots of different colors and different shapes, and inside that there's a hidden number.
Yes, that's.
You remember that one? They call it a figure ground test.
Yeah. Okay.
And my son cannot see the figure that's hidden, that number. He can't see it because that's part of what the diagnosis was. It took us 4 years. I'm a qualified psychologist. That is an eye issue that we were only able to identify much later. And what we actually found out when we went to the right people that could actually have the right technology is that his eyes were tracking independently. So instead of, normal, you would kind of read a line and then kind of zigzag back and then read across and then zigzag back, and your eyes would track down a page. Not my son. He was literally, he had too much information landing in his brain at the same time that he couldn't see and make sense of. It was almost too much noise. So
I
what
don't have
I've
enough
learned,
landing in my brain, and he has too much.
so what I've learned along the way is that you can solve problems out there, but it doesn't mean you can always even solve or identify the problems even at home.
Wow.
And sometimes what I've learned from my own family is how can I take those lessons and apply those lessons out there. So for me, they're very practical.
So are you suggesting practicalness and common sense in making diversity and inclusion less hated? I don't know. Like, people have a real problem with its unfairness. And so these things seems like small fixes that don't really cause huge conflicts, but solve problems. Is that what motivated you to find these solutions?
So I left a full-time job to actually, my passion was to make a difference, particularly in our country. We have one of the highest unemployment youth populations in the world.
Okay.
We have more unemployed than we have employed. So it's almost like a time bomb waiting. You can't take a 60% youth unemployment and then the 40% that are working are going to keep the 60%.
Yeah.
So we have a crime problem, and then the crime problem becomes compounding other problems.
Yeah.
So sometimes when we start our problem solving, we start saying, well, let's build more jails. That's not solving the youth unemployment problem. It's solving the 60% that should be working that aren't working, who are then turning to crime, because what else do they do? So if we actually go through this thing and we say, so my contribution was, how can I help create employment? How can I find some of those people that are learned, that are qualified, but that are unable to get into those workplaces? How can I bridge that gap? And what is it that those qualifications don't know how to get the job? So how can I help and play in that space? And in a period of time, I ended up placing 3,500 unemployed qualified people into positions where they could, in a year, they could then apply that qualification in a practical way. And again, I learned that from my first employer. My first employer allowed me to keep a factory going. I was a team. Okay, so we actually came up with a proposal, and we said, rather than shut this factory and terminate 3,500 jobs, how can we actually move this factory to work faster, better, more efficiently, safer, at higher levels of quality? But we did it from a learning interventions point of view. So we rewrote every job description. We trained that factory. So we spent 15% of payroll to train that factory up in a time frame. And our government 4 years later then said, let's spend 0.5% of payroll. So when you got a good idea, and again, we had to convince, management and senior management and executives and global, we had to convince them that this was actually a good return on the investment.
Yeah. So DEI is good for the company, good for investments.
It's good for a community as well.
It's good for everything. And then people, and this is we're going to finish in 3 minutes, if you're okay with that. That story that I think is really great, which shows hope and also shows your expertise in working with skills training about the young African women and qualifications. Remember that story?
Yeah, Jessica, there's so many. Just try and help me a little bit more.
Well,
which one?
Well, the story's not too long, but the idea is that a lot of white dudes go, oh, those people are taking our jobs and they don't have the right qualifications, or they don't have the right experience. And you were telling me that you guys were doing a program to help young African women in South Africa get those positions, and when they got there, how to help them so that it worked out, that they don't get fired in a couple of years because of the lack of opportunities.
Good story short is that those learners that came in, we actually employed some of them ourselves. And when I eventually shut that business down, I had created a platform for 3 women to start their own independent businesses. In fact, the one of them, I had to knock on the door a couple of years later and say, Ursula, can I come and work with you? And she was like, hang on a moment. So what we did is we were able to show people that there are right ways of working rightly. But you've got to take that chance as the employer. You've got to actually take that investment in terms of potential, that hope that they will be able to. And I've got examples of that. Translates when you give people that gift, when you give people that opportunity, and you mentor and you show and you guide and you direct, the ripple impact. It's like the story I always use is it's a millie, a corn cob. So you take one little corn and you plant it, and then that produces a flower, and the flower has a number of stalks, and each of those stalks has 50 little pops on them. So it's this idea of exponential, but you've got to invest in that one.
Yeah.
And particularly if they're not the same as you, because that's when you start seeing, they will see things that you can't or don't see.
See and seed.
Yes.
And new things will grow with diversity.
Yeah.
Got to pop off because I am talking to Thomas in 3 minutes, and you have so many stories, and it was so nice talking to you for an hour the other day. And I'm really glad that there's people like you talking about hope and doing things, planting seeds, growing different flowers. And you give me goosebumps when you talk. So thank you, Rory.
And the one thing I want to show off is the idea of a kaleidoscope. You know, when you kind of move that lens and there's those colors and the lights. That's what I aspire to, seeing that diversity in action.
It will.
Jessica, thank you for the time.
Thank you, Rory. Bye, buddy.